Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. I'm Adam Huss, coming to you from North Carolina, actually, in the Smoky Mountains. Thanks so much for listening. Apologies for the audio quality of this intro. The interview has amazing quality. Don't worry, I'm just in North Carolina and didn't bring my usual microphone setup from Los Angeles. The sponsor for this and all episodes is Centralis Wine. Centralis is an ecological winery that I started to protect or benefit the environment and my community with every business and winemaking decision. I envision a wine world in which humans are the students and servants of the non-human world, regenerating and protecting the vitality of ecosystems and promoting the diversity of life through wines that uniquely and deliciously reflect local abundance. Centralis wines feature foraged prickly pears, urban perennial polyculture wine garden produced grapes, gleanings from urban fruit trees, dry farmed century-old vines, and organic and biodynamic viticulture of all types and shapes and sizes. If this sounds interesting to you, join our email list or our wine club and learn more at centraliswine.com. That's CENTRALAS wine.com. My guest for this episode is Drew Herman. Drew is the Vineyard Manager at JK Carriere Wines in Oregon, and wow, listening to him makes me want to drink anything made from fruit that he helps grow. Before we recorded this, Drew gave me an outline of things that he wanted to talk about, and he titled it Microbial Democracy. And what he discusses here blows open doors of understanding about the way soil and plants work from a fundamental perspective. You will not be able to think about growing vines or anything else in the same way after listening to this. Drew explains how the soil has a voice. He introduces the new findings about microbial quorum sensing and signaling, and how the soil is like a big ongoing chemical conversation, a UN of microbes. We then get into epigenetics and how soil microbes actually impact not only vine health, but also wine flavor, and so much more. He gives specific and practical applications for this knowledge and promotes independent science and freedom from purchased bottle solutions to viticultural problems. Beware, this episode may make you smarter, freer, and more full of wonder. A special thanks to James Endicott of Vinocity Selections for introducing me to Drew. I think once you hear what Drew has to share, you'll want to thank James too. Enjoy. Drew, thanks so much for doing this. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to be here.
For by way of introduction, can you just sort of tell, where you are and what you're doing, who you are, what your position is, where you came from, and how you got there?
Yeah. Maybe I'll start chronologically, sort of.
Yeah, great.
I currently am the Vineyard Manager at JK Carriere, which is a winery up on the top of Parrot Mountain in the Willamette Valley. Cool spot. Love it there. Great team. But I arrived that way via, I'll try to keep it sort of short, maybe, but
yeah.
I was born in Colville, Washington, which is like the way northeast corner of Washington State, up by Idaho and Canada. And my family has a property up there where for generations we raised cattle. Pretty low input as far as the farming was going until, the government scientists told us that we needed to do things a certain way, and that kind of cashed the business. And so what we still have up there is a regenerative tree farm that we try to harvest sustainably. So when I was 12 years, what's that?
For lumber?
For lumber, yeah. It's Western Larch, or everybody up there calls it tamarack. But it's cool because it's self-seeding every year because we have squirrels, lots of them.
Ah, beautiful.
So when I was 12, we moved to Oklahoma, which was very different. Wow. We moved to Bethel Acres, Oklahoma, which is kind of, it's all tribal land where we grew up. And so it was a very different experience from the mountains moving to scrub oak and prairie. But it was really interesting because it was very rural, and I got to have quite a few rural experiences as a kid. One of those was joining FFA, which is Future Farmers of America. I'm sure you've seen
wow.
those cool blue jackets at all the natural wine fairs.
I haven't actually,
Oh
but then I'm
man,
not a huge attendee at fairs in general. But
the
um,
last couple tastings I've been to, somebody's had an FFA jacket on, trying to be cool, and I was
so
so
it's kind
cringe
of
to me because they're terrible and just bring back memories of embarrassment. And
gotcha.
but
Uh,
anyway, in FFA, I was, introduced to animal husbandry, and which was great. I showed pigs and sheep and
nice.
cattle, and, delivered pigs and all sorts of fun things. And but we also had a horticulture program, which my mom kind of pushed me to do because she really liked gardening and flowers, and so does my grandma. And
Mm.
so I decided that I would participate in the horticulture program, and then turned out I really, really liked it and was good at it. And so I continued to do that. My team, I'm very proud of this. We won state in the plant judging and identification contest my senior year.
Nice.
I know. But anyway, after that, I went to college, and I wanted to study science because I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And about halfway through, I started taking more and more botany classes just because I was interested in them, but I hadn't really considered plants a career option for me. And as I kept studying it, and I kept gardening at home, and I couldn't read enough of these like books of alternative farming methods, because I just felt like after studying ecology at school that there must be a better answer to farming. And so I think some of the first books I read were on permaculture and whole system design, and One Straw Revolution, those kinds
Oh
of
yeah.
books.
How old were you at this point when you were reading these? In your 20s or?
Probably 21 or so.
Okay, so like right in the college age
Yeah.
zone. Yeah.
And I really, really, really was. It wasn't just veggie gardening, if I'm going to be honest. I was also in college, so I definitely had a couple lights in the basement, and was growing cannabis. It's legal there now, but um,
Right. Oh
but
yes. I mean, I definitely had a closet full at one point in my life as well in college.
I like you already. Um, but the study of ecology and the study of these plant systems, and then growing something in a completely controlled environment, really opened up my eyes to things that I'd never considered before. And the the study of ecology really kind of like started to pique my interest more and more. And so I started taking these classes that they were like field ecology classes, like wetland ecology and like field mammalogy, and which were great. There's a biological research station that the University of Oklahoma owns, which is where I went to school. Go Sooners!
Okay.
And we went down there for like a week or two at a time, and we would just like be in the field with professors from all over the place, and they would teach us to look at these systems in a much more observational way. um, and that was great, like experiences like being chest deep in the middle of a swamp, and and feeling like just seeing nothing but beauty around you in a place that other people might find very disgusting slash scary.
Mm.
And that's when I learned about how ecosystems truly developed, and how ecosystems tend to find balance and some sort of stasis on their own. And that really kind of has that's driven the rest of my career, I think, since then.
Yeah.
The idea that these environments can provide all the nutrition that they need, sort of, and can give life to all sorts of things, even in extremely thick and dense plantings, where they're supposed to be, right? Competition for nutrients and water. You don't see it in these natural ecosystems, especially in prairies, right? Like the idea that so many plants can exist in such dense spacing in an area that might not get that much water. Like, how does that make sense? And how does that make sense, in light of everything that I had learned about agriculture and growing plants before? How does it make sense that there's not really strong competition or competition like you'd think, and that, even in the absence of rainfall, these things survive and thrive even. And so it just kind of made me question everything, like competition, irrigation, all of these things that were, required to farm just didn't really match up to what nature does. And then I just started kind of thinking about exclusion and what it means, and being reductive in your thought processes, and what that implies, and realizing that exclusion and reduction leads to imbalance in all of these systems. When we go and remove something, it's not necessarily going to be replaced by the thing that you want. It might throw everything off. Or, same goes with adding too much of something to an ecosystem can throw everything off. So thinking about diversity being balance was kind of, and coming to realize that that's true in all of life, really. Like, it's true. Yeah. It's true, socially it's true. We see the implications, I think, every day on the news of what happens when you exclude. It creates an imbalance, and then, like, the whole system suffers because of it. Same on a farm. If you're growing many crops and you have a diversified income, when your row of lettuce bolts, it's not that big of a deal because you have enough other things to pad the system. And I think the opposite of balance is definitely, like, needs to be thought of as supremacy and suppression. The idea or the lack of understanding, even with good intention, can lead to unrealized or unrecognized suppression. And that's kind of like where this talk is going, is our unawareness toward the natural world is actually going to lead to greater and greater imbalances. And even in society, the goal should be for everyone to have a voice. And I also think that we should be giving a voice to nature in this process.
Yeah. Yeah, it is part of our society. I mean, what we call nature is the society. Yeah. And we're part of it, really. Let me ask you, did this thinking, this thinking developed, out of everything you were learning? Did this come before, did it lead you to wine, or did wine further inform it, or really, consolidate this kind of thinking for you, working in vineyards, I guess?
Yeah, well, it definitely consolidated it. I don't think it necessarily led me to wine. I was a veggie farmer by trade for many years, as was my wife. And we worked on other people's farms. And, I think we're still very passionate veggie farmers. The truth is, I had pretty much no interest in winemaking or farming a vineyard. I was mostly led there because veggie farming doesn't pay very well. And I needed to make, enough income to do things like eat and pay rent.
Yeah.
So my father-in-law knew that I loved, I brewed beer, well before I was 21. When I was 12 years old, I had made wine under my bed as part of a Revolutionary era trade fair that our school was making us do. And I had chose to be a tavern keep, nice. Which was surprising to my very religious parents, but they were cool and they let me do it. They're like, there's no way that he'll make alcohol, but they didn't know that, alcohol kind of makes itself.
Right.
So I was successful. Got in a little bit of trouble for bringing that to school, but I don't think anybody knew what to do with me, so they were just like, well.
He's really getting into his role.
Yeah.
Method acting.
Sorry, I got sidetracked, but yeah, my father-in-law was just like, I think that you should really, think about getting into wine. It's got all the farming, all the science, it pays apparently, and and and
TBD.
yeah. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll consider it, but I just, I wasn't quite sure, and I didn't really want to leave veggies, um one day I was kind of just like, felt like the current farm I was on was just, not making decisions based on any sort of science or anything like that, and that frustrated me. And I think that every young person, when they're working for people, tend to see like all the bad and what they could fix, because when you're young you kind of know everything, and then when you get a little older you're like, wow.
Yeah.
But my mother-in-law and my wife were hanging out and with me, and they just like wouldn't let it go. They're like, you need to apply for a wine job, you need to do this, you need to do this, and basically wrote a resume for me. And I sent it out to like a whole bunch of wineries and that were hiring for harvest, and almost all of them reached back out to me and asked if I could, if they could interview me, which really, really surprised me, because I felt like the bar to entry, must be pretty high to get into the wine industry. Since I've grown up, I've realized really all you need is like an art history degree or something like that.
It turns out the bar is really low.
It turns out it's really low. If you minored in like middle English poetry, you're good. Get in there.
Well, especially I'm sure that's even more true now, because the labor shortages are pretty crazy right now, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure you guys are feeling it a little bit there. I mean, maybe you can talk about that, but
yeah. No.
All joking aside, I think there is like a real need for people to get into any kind of agriculture, and this,
please do. We need like interested, thoughtful, smart people. You don't need to know anything. Like, we need compassionate people. We need all sorts. We need everybody. We need drivers too.
Yeah. Let's flip the script. I mean, farmers are cool. They're not the dorky kids, that you were taught that they were back in high school. Like,
yeah, no, I mean, I think that every farmer I know is incredibly intelligent and incredibly cultured, and I think farmers are some of the biggest heroes that we have. It's interesting when like when you're young, you're like taught to
yourself.
Yeah, what's that?
If you do say so yourself.
Yeah, if I do say, yeah. No, but I mean, when I was young growing up,
fully in agreement.
Doctors, lawyers, farmers, those were like respected people, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
And then you grow up and you realize that we respect them, just not financially, generally.
Yeah.
And I think that needs to change. Definitely, if we're gonna attract, the best of the best to help fix our planet, we need to figure out a way to compensate people.
Yeah. Well said. I'm sorry, I wanted to just tease you a little bit, but
please tease away. I'm a family of all boys. I don't think I've ever gone unteased.
But so this is what led you into wine, essentially, was you put out your resume and you were like, do you need help with harvest? And everyone was like, yes, we do. And you had your pick, I guess, of where you wanted to work.
I did have my pick, and one of the picks was a guy named Mike Halleck at Carabella Vineyards, I was interested in working for somebody that had been doing it for quite some time, mostly, and that was a little older, and somewhere that I could be, kind of the right hand man, because I really wanted to learn everything, and he gave me the opportunity to do that, which was really cool. He owns a vineyard called Carabella Vineyard, which is actually just down the street from where I currently work. So it's good to be back up on that mountain.
Nice.
But when I was there, he taught me everything that he knew, and taught me processes and things like that. But there were still some questions that I had unanswered, and so I would just continually read everything I could on winemaking, and try to make sense of the things that didn't make sense, and which I think drove him a little crazy sometimes, because I just never stopped answering questions. But he instead of trying to keep me down, encouraged that. And he the vineyard management company that we worked with at the time was Results Partners, and I know you interviewed Lee Bartholomew. She's awesome. I got to work for her for just kind of like, I don't know, it's like 6 or 9 months or something like that, while I worked at Carabella Vineyard, and just go around and visit all the different vineyards and see all the different practices that people were doing, and realized, while working there, that, there's 1,000 different ways to farm grapes, and, like, being dogmatic and stuck on any one thing isn't going to teach you anything. So I worked there for a while, and then I went and worked at Division Wine Company afterward, and which was a cool spot. It was an urban winery, and what really intrigued me about the place was that they were, making wine naturally, and that they had, like, I don't even know, like 27 bottlings a year, all sorts of different varieties, things that I would probably have to like work, multiple years at to even get to work with these kinds of grapes and these styles. And they really pushed style, and they really gave me a lot of freedom to push style. And then during COVID, things got a little harder to pay the rent there. And so we ended up having to cut quite a bit of the staff. And then I was there pretty much alone for the first, 6 months of COVID. And then after that, they needed to continue cutting staff too. And so I made the decision that, I needed to go back to the vineyard. I needed to farm. And so I started looking for something else, and JK Carriere was hiring, and I was like, well, okay, that'll be probably a good shortstop on my way to find something. And then when I got there, I realized that they did all the farming themselves, and with the help of outside crew for some larger jobs. But for the most part, Jim has been farming JK Carriere, since its inception. And suddenly I was like, wow, there's a lot to learn here, a lot to learn from this guy. He's hands down one of the best tractor drivers I've ever met, which is funny. He's like a business owner, and he should be doing other things, but he just loves being out there.
That's awesome. Well, that's great. So, I mean, I would love to. I mean, I there's more I want to dig into what you were saying about, ecology and how that has informed more of your thinking.
Right.
If I can ask you, because you brought it up and you had all these questions that you kept asking and looking for answers about what, these practices in the vineyards, what, things may or may not be science-based. And I'm curious if you discovered things that might be common practice in a lot of vineyards that you think are, not based in science and probably a waste of time at this point, and vice versa, like things that people should be doing that they're not doing, for quality or for vine health or whatever. Like, do you have any examples of those kind of things?
Sure. Like, okay, some examples, might be somewhat incendiary. So I would like to just say first, there's 1,000 ways to farm grapes. There's no wrong way. I think some sites are just totally different, so you can't apply everything to every site. You really just have to be observant and look at what's around you, and maybe something that is a really bad choice, on my vineyard could be a good choice on yours. Tilling is so dumb. We have to stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
The idea that that there's strong water competition and nutrient competition is just false, except for young vines. But once a vine is established, weeds are not your biggest problem. The biggest problem could actually be you if you're going in there and tilling. And I'm not saying you should never till. There's some times that you should definitely till. If you have insanely compacted soils, you're not doing yourself any favors by having tons of bunch grass, on top of that soil, further compacting it. So it might be a good idea to break it up. Or say you have like a massive weed outbreak, which like it might make sense to till and sow maybe like a smother crop in place that will prevent the weed or outcompete the weeds. But all of these methods, they change the environment. Anytime you go in and you do something to your soil, you are doing what I was talking about earlier. You're reducing or excluding, which that has an environmental impact on the biology of the soil. And so when we use these methods, we need to really be thinking about what's happening in the soil because of these methods. And I guess I'll just get into it. Microbes have a voice. They truly do. The soil has a voice. Yeah. We're just now kind of understanding this voice. We've, I think, forever viewed soil as dirt, as this basically just a ton of minerals and some critters in there. But the critters weren't necessarily all that important to us.
Yeah.
And we started farming based on what wasn't there, we would add there, and what we didn't want there, we would try to remove. And that was without any understanding of the actual life that exists there. But that was as far as we knew. So because we thought we knew how the soil worked, we've been making really bad choices for a very long time. And so the soil itself, when I say it speaks, I mean it actually speaks. You have somebody's probably said something about quantum signaling or quorum signals. And
no, I'm gonna say you might be the first, and I'm really excited to talk about this with you. So yeah, if you can take it as if we've never heard of this before.
Great.
What the heck are you talking about?
So quorum signals is how cells understand their population density, and they might make different choices based on their population density, or they're basically all talking to each other through these chemicals. And on the outside of all of their cells, they have these chemoreceptors, or certain proteins or things like that, and they can literally taste their environment, and they see their environment that way, different than how we see our environment with our eyes or hear our environment with our ears. They're having just as robust communication, but they're doing it with these signals, these chemical signals to each other. An example of this is in wine would be like malolactic fermentation, where Onococcus will be fermenting sugars, will be fermenting everything that everybody else in that soup is eating, until they reach a population density. And there's enough of those chemicals out there, they're all producing this chemical, that it switches a gene on, and they change their digestive pathway, and they start eating malic acid instead of sugar, and they produce lactic acid as a excretion.
Right.
So this is happening in wine. This is also happening in the soil. There's billions and billions of microbes, mycorrhiza, things like that in just a few tablespoons of soil. And they are all, in their life cycle, they're all producing these chemical signals. They're all talking to each other. they're actually talking between species, which is crazy to think about, right? They know each other's languages. Some know more than others. Some are extremely adept and they know everybody's voice. Plants also understand and hear these signals, and as well as mycorrhiza, and molds, which those guys are like, they're amazing with what they can do with the information the soil's giving them. So since they're all talking, there's basically like this microbial UN is the best way to think of it. There's this like broad democracy where everybody's sending out signals. They're sending out the data, and most of the data has to do with population numbers or environmental conditions, or population numbers of somebody else, which is really interesting. Say like, for instance, trichoderma, a green soil mold, might sense that there's quite a bit of anthracnose around them. They will literally tell the plant, or they'll tell a mycorrhiza who tells the plant, or vice versa. Sorry, it's complicated. They will literally tell the plant, hey, it's time to get that immune system kicking off. Like, we got to go. Disease is here. Like, you got to start thinking about this. And which I think is really fascinating, right? That a soil mold, a single-celled organism can tell a plant, hey, there's disease around you.
Right.
So what happens is, and quorum sensing is different than quorum signals, where quorum signals are really just kind of like how it talks. Quorum sensing is when the total environment, like I said, the microbial UN, they're all sending their voices out there, and the soil itself will reach, because of just the data, will reach a consensus on a quorum on how to move forward. And this is really fascinating to me, because even things like which seeds germinate can be decided by quorum sensing, which is super cool to me. So if the soil is highly compacted or recently disturbed, the soil will tell those like certain species that are like bioaccumulators, like thistle or things like that, or daikon. It will tell those things to germinate, and germinate rapidly, and it will actually suppress the germination of other seeds.
Huh.
I know, crazy, right?
That's amazing. Yeah.
So, and they do other things too, like quorum sensing can initiate disease, which is really interesting. It can actually give free rein to pathogens to go ahead and kill its host plant. It can. Wow. I know.
Why would it do that?
Perhaps that plant isn't where it should be. You know?
Interesting. Yeah.
Or perhaps they can't survive on that host plant because of environmental conditions for the host plant. So they basically are like, okay, we'll stop protecting this thing. Go ahead and take it down.
Wow.
Yeah. It's really interesting to me, but there's other things that are even more interesting. There, like some microbes, for instance, anthracnose, in the presence of a strong population of other little critters, can actually change its entire life cycle and become a beneficial to a plant rather than being a pathogen.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but this is all population dependent, right? So what can we do with that information is we can really focus on making these balanced populations. And where can we find those? Well, in a forest, there's sometimes you'll see like vast amounts of open ground with, not a whole lot of vegetation, but some unique plants growing. And a lot of that is driven by these quorum signals. But if you go in and change that, if you go, say, like disturb the soil, for instance, by you go through and till or whatever, then you actually change the quorum sensing, and all of these seeds are allowed to germinate that have always been there in the seed bank. So what's in the soil, that is keeping these things suppressed is, which in Korean natural farming, they call it soil leaf mold. And, we're just looking at the humus layer, right? This top layer is just absolutely rich with microbes. And the soil underneath these microbes is light and fluffy and well aerated. And further down where there's less oxygen, it's still less compacted, and there's a high degree of mineralization happening. But when we go through and rapidly change that environment, we basically kill a lot of people. But what we really do is we bring the populations to different levels, and that chemical signaling changes entirely. So we do this in the vineyard all the time too. We don't understand that our actions are reshaping the entire ecological balance of our soil, and we'll go through and we'll till and suddenly get a rapid growth of a whole bunch of weeds that we didn't want.
Right.
Which is funny. Right. And then that triggers for us hand labor or more mowing passes. And what mowing, and some people are like, big deal, you mow. Well, compaction, which is usually caused by heavy machinery on the soil, is also an excellent way to throw off this quorum sensing. So quorum sensing, if in uncompacted soil, it can be a whole field. It can be a whole side of a mountain, depending on how uninterrupted the signals are.
Right.
But so compaction is a huge one. Compaction is probably the biggest reason we have unhealthy soils. We drive on them all the time, and we essentially create these brick barriers between vines, between rows, between fields. And that really matters. That really matters because, that soil that we're blocking, that's how our plants get fed. Those are the guys that are literally fermenting rocks to give us minerals.
Right.
So when we mess with that ferment or we cut them off from each other, we start basically just destroying our ability to produce our own fertilizer, like right there at the plant base.
So, this sounds like a strong argument for a grazing-based type of viticulture where you have animals.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
No, it is absolutely the future. Bringing animals back onto land is absolutely the future. It's so silly that we took them off, because that's what we did. We took them off. So they were supposed to be there. We removed them, and then we saw a massive die-off of our soil.
Right. You know the old Wendell Berry quote, right? We had this beautiful solution and then neatly divided it into two problems.
Yeah.
Where when we separated the animals from the farm, essentially, or from the crops, basically.
Yeah, the remineralization, it's honestly just they're constantly dropping out microbes in their feces and urine. And these are microbes that are living on the vegetation that already exists in that area. So they are the right microbes for the right area. But then they get to be basically cultured rapidly inside the warm, happy gut of a ewe or something. And then immediately returned right back to place and increasing the population of those microbes exponentially. You don't need that much manure to rapidly increase soil biology. But the other thing we did besides removing animals is we removed genes. By selective breeding over years and years and years, we've bred out the ability for many plants to continue to receive these quorum signals or quorum sensing.
Oh, wow.
Which is why we have so much disease in vinifera. A lot of those genes that were there are no longer there, or they're there, right? The genes maybe are there, but they forgot how to access them. But sometimes the genes aren't there, but the pathway is still there, which is really where this idea of quorum sensing is applicable. So we bred out these genes. We know that American varieties have a lot of these genes still, so we crossbreed with them to bring these genes back. But the pathways are often still there, and the microbes remember the pathway. The plant doesn't. And it's kind of like if you dated somebody in middle school and then you saw them as adult and you didn't remember them, but they're like, "Hey dude, I remember you for sure."
That's funny. If just as an aside, we just released a wine with Centralis called "Hello, Old Friend," and the label is a picture of the Earth saying that to us. It's
Mm-hmm.
the Earth is saying "Hello, old friend," and it's that exact idea is why I made that label. Was that we may have forgotten that relationship, but the Earth hasn't.
No, the Earth has not. It's so there's something called systemic induced resistance or systemic acquired resistance, and this is a fascinating study. They're doing some pretty hard work on this at Oregon State University. Laurent Deluc, professor, he's been studying these pathways and trying to develop RNAi products that you can basically trigger these old pathways, which is really interesting. And it's really not even that complicated. I mean, I'm sure like the study and research and everything that's gone into it is complicated, but it really is just like knocking on a door that the plant forgot was there, or it's more like rushing in a door that the plant forgot was there, and telling it to behave a certain way. There's broader implications for that kind of technology that we can get into maybe. But the interesting thing about these forgotten pathways is that the same sort of thing that RNAi drugs can induce, trichoderma can induce. So a lowly soil mold can go on a plant, knock on a door that the plant forgot was there, tell the plant, hey, disease is coming, you need to start taking this seriously, and the plant will, through pathways that the plant didn't even know that it had. And so this implies then that if we go in and till and remove the environment for these things, we're removing the ability for the soil to tell the plant to take care of itself.
Does it go even further than just protection? Does the soil, does the communication with the soil also impact? I mean, this idea of quorum sensing and epigenetics, does it actually impact the flavor of wine ultimately? Like what gets expressed, what pheromones? I don't know all the biology that goes into making grapes, but like, is this something that you can talk to? Is it like,
Yeah. No,
yeah, like
absolutely. So the
yeah,
grapevines, their number one defense is something that we find just absolutely delicious: phenolics,
right,
flavonoids, anthocyanins. All of these things are able to either prevent cellular oxidation, or they can prevent predation by insects. And what that this induced and systemic resistance does basically is you will get a release of salicylic acid, which is the same thing in aspirin and willow bark, those kinds of things. Aloe
uh-huh,
vera has tons of it,
uh-huh, ah,
um, and anyway, it triggers the salicylic pathway, which produces jasmonic acid, which then produces ethylene, and a whole host of other hormones are triggered by this. And so the plant goes into overdrive, producing all of these things to protect itself. And that only increases flavor and color, which is really interesting to think about.
that's awesome. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about. Um,
So
man,
So you said epigenetics, and epigenetics is basically the environment triggering a gene expression. So
okay,
there's tons and tons and tons of genes in your body. They're not all being transcribed and replicated within the cell at any given moment. It's usually there's an order of things, but basically the environment can tell the cell, hey, these are your conditions, or the cell can see the environmental conditions. That's actually an easier way of saying it.
mm-hmm.
And it will, based on those environmental conditions, express certain genes that are necessary. Your body does this all the time. Based on environmental conditions, certain genes will express. Drought conditions in plants will express certain genes. There's loads and loads and loads of these kinds of things, and this is what actually leads toward evolution of a species. we used to think that evolution of a species was solely related toward, who adapts best to the environment. If you don't die, you breed, and your good genes are passed on. Which there's something true to that, but recently we've discovered that speciation can happen incredibly fast. Since we started studying like the Galapagos Islands, there's been several new species of finches, which is really funny because we thought forever it would take millions of years. But what happens is the environment will cause a gene expression, and when you're actually, when you have offspring, if those genes are switched on, then your offspring can be born with those genes switched on. And so that obviously triggers very fast. So there is a survive and adapt. If you don't have anything switched on, you could definitely die. And that part of basic evolution is true, but you can actually change genetic expression within yourself, which is
another way of saying that it's not just like fitness in this idea of Darwinian evolution isn't just about strength and dominance, but it's about like who has the most connection to its world and its environment and everything in it.
That's really beautiful. I hope so. I hope that's what I'm saying.
This is amazing. Keep going. Don't let me stop you. I just wanted to.
So if we know that it's quorum sensing and all of this stuff, and that we can trigger pathways with microbes, then we should breed a lot of these microbes, right? These specific microbes like trichoderma, and we should spray them all over or soak our soils with them. That's the obvious conclusion, but that's not entirely true either. We're talking about population balance. So even if you're going in and spraying a biological, it works, but you're also throwing off the entire soil ecology by introduction of, trillions of these little critters that aren't from there.
Wow.
So that's just something to think about. Like there should definitely be more study on the effects of biological and long-term ecology of a site.
Yeah.
And that's why you shouldn't spray, the same mold or the same bacteria every single spray. You should mix it up for sure.
Got it.
But I'm not saying that those things are wrong. I think they're wonderful tools, but there's other ways to achieve this microbial balance from your site. Really interesting. When I was young and growing up and thinking about human health and living soil, I started realizing over reading, that a lot of the diseases that we face are because of microbial imbalances in our gut. And that can be, caused by diet, environmental conditions, many, many things. But you started reading about fecal transplants and people that are receiving somebody else's poop. They are, not miraculously, but they recover from these chronic immune diseases, right?
Wow.
Because our immune system is very, very influenced by the microbial balance of our gut. If you have the wrong microbes, they can tell your immune system. They can constantly be sending this signal saying attack, 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 attack. And so your immune system will constantly attack you. And that causes things like Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, things like this, where it's your body attacking you over and over and over. It can be entirely dictated by gut health. And so thinking about that, that just was okay, so naturally we're supposed to be full of this balanced microbes. And at the time I was growing fun plants indoors, and I started learning about living soil and compost teas. People like, he goes by the name Clackamas Coots, who has a reading library. You can Google that. He talks a lot about living soil and how to make these living soils. And so then I had to spend a lot of time figuring out how do I make this indoor environment ecologically rich. And that was through the use of compost teas and microbes and things that feed the soil population, not the plant. So then I moved away from buying any sort of fertilizers whatsoever, besides making a good mineral rich soil, and started focusing on just growing the soil. And the plants were extremely healthy. A lot of people don't give credit, I think, to the research that's gone on by citizen scientists that just like to get stoned. There's been a lot.
Yeah.
The use of kelp, in vineyards, strongly influenced by ganja growers using kelp, who were strongly influenced by things they saw while traveling to Asia to get seeds. Like the cannabis community, I think, deserves quite a bit of credit for some of the more technical knowledge we have of these fertilizers.
It's amazing you say that. I actually reached out to some cannabis growers to come on the podcast because that's what I mean. I was like, there's a lot of science that goes into vineyards for sure, but the level of scientific knowledge of just a guy that has a garage grow exceeds literally like 90% of what's in viticulture out there. It's crazy. Like these guys have dialed it in so crazily and have so much knowledge. It's that it's like really hats off to the cannabis growers. There's a ton of knowledge there that is definitely transferable to anything that we're growing. It's funny you say that.
I agree. I also have to say a lot of veggie farmers have really dialed, especially the organic guys, have really dialed down some really cool processes. And I just want to say this: you should be growing more than one kind of plant. Always. If you're a farmer, you should have a veggie garden. There's so much to learn about the seasonal conditions and about your soil and about plant health by growing more than one thing. So go out there and garden.
Well said.
But there's a lot. I would say the other place to look for a lot of these ideas is because they were largely adopted. These cannabis ideas were largely adopted from indigenous cultures, or largely adopted from specifically Korea. There's a farm, the institute there called the Jadam Institute, headed by Young-Sung Cho. They are doing really, really cool things. They're trying to...
Can you repeat the name of the institute?
Jadam. I don't know how to pronounce it, honestly. It's Jadam.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine. Yeah. Just so we can research that, find out more. Thanks.
Yeah. So they're doing just absolutely incredible work, working with just what they have on site and proving that you can make everything you need. You can essentially go jugless. You don't need to buy anything. These microbial processes, once you understand them, you can start to shift your operation toward microbial health of the total site. And they're doing things like, growing potatoes, boiling potatoes, mashing the potatoes up, putting it in water, and then throwing a handful of forced humus in and letting it ferment for several days. Just anybody can do that for the most part.
Yep.
You don't need to do potatoes. You just need basically a microbial food. So any sort of carbohydrate. You could use sugar, which the Korean natural farming people aren't super into, but I do it, or we do it at JK Carriere. We have started making compost tea, highly aerated.
When you say sugar, are you using molasses? Or are you actually using straight sugar?
No, we're using unsulfured molasses.
Yeah. Okay.
But in smaller and smaller quantities now, though. But the last brew we did, we had cut the sugar in half, and it took a little bit longer to achieve the results that we wanted, which you can see by bacterial films, and which are just basically tons of bubbles on top of the tea. And so that took a little bit more time to cut the sugar in half, but I definitely think the way forward is using something that is a little bit slower to be processed, so you can kind of get a more balanced growth. So anyway, so they take this native soil from the site, from a rich growing area of the site, and they blow this up in this population, and then they spray this or water this in all over their property. And they have some of the most beautiful looking produce around. And they're doing all of this without paying any money to a large corporation who really has set up the agriculture industry to bleed them dry.
Right.
And anyway, so, and these bacterial films are pretty amazing. Bacterial films they're not necessarily in themselves alive, but what they are is basically bacterial cities or mycorrhizal cities or mold cities. They excrete this gel-like substance that contains all the nutrients that they need. So they'll store nutrients there. They'll transfer nutrients to each other, because not all microbes are mobile. Most of them aren't. So they will, like staph does this. Staphylococcus, which if you've ever had a boil, you've seen the goo coming out. It's a mixture of plasma and bacterial film. It's just a way for the population to stay in one place and feed itself. So the implications for that in farming is that if we create these bacterial films, these microbe cities, and we spray them on our plants or in our soil, we're not only providing microbes, but we're providing them a home and plumbing and all those things.
Right. So, yeah, I was going to ask, with all of this, can we talk about practical application in viticulture?
Sure. Practical application.
What are you doing in the vineyard? What is the timing of what you're doing? That kind of thing. Yeah.
Great. So I don't want to, we're still working this out and working on it. So I don't want to misrepresent and say that we've got a dialed in system.
Got it. Like, this isn't necessarily the way to do it. This is the way you are doing it.
Yeah. And we're still testing it out. But so we're making highly aerated compost teas currently, and we have fermented some weeds from the property, and that's currently aging. And I think we're going to probably try it out on the veggie garden first at work, just to make sure that we're not doing anything crazy. But
no, yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, will you spray that on the soil only, or up into the canopy and on the up in the phyllosphere, or just
yes
on the soil? Everywhere.
Yeah. So yeah, the leaves.
You're gonna fly over with a helicopter and carpet bomb that vineyard with compost tea.
God, I hope so. We were just talking about that the other day. I was talking about getting less tractor passes in, and my boss jokingly was like, "Well, why don't we just get a crop duster?" And I was like, "Whoa, no, we should." That'd be amazing. Right. So practical application of this is in the fall and in the spring when the soil is still wet and the plants are just coming out. You can spray compost tea, and you can inoculate these fresh shoots with, something really healthy for them. These microbes grow on leaves too. They hang out around the stomata on the underside of leaves and on top of them, and they just sit there. And some of them will fix phosphorus right out of the air, or fix nitrogen right out of the air, and continue to feed and foster a relationship with the plant throughout that growing cycle. Or you can spray something to kill them all, which is what most people are doing.
Right.
So
now is that? I guess that's my other question. In doing this, is your hope to just increase vitality, or are you actually trying to outcompete mildews like powdery?
Yeah, no, absolutely outcompete and vitality. So that you both of those things.
And thereby, are you trying to eliminate the use of things like stylet oil or other, things to, other fungicidal oils in the vineyard?
Yeah, we didn't use any. JK has maybe used it in the past. I honestly don't know. I'd have to ask Jim. But we're not planning on doing stylet oil. No, we're doing the opposite. Instead of total suppression, we're trying to just inoculate. Like I said, most of these things aren't mobile until they sporulate. Then they're everywhere. But it's really just kind of besides the quorum sensing part, which is incredibly important, before all we ever thought it was just a space gain. So we were like, we'll put this bacteria here and just occupy this area so this mold can't grow. And that part is true, but we don't need to do it. That's not entirely true. Sometimes the population doesn't even have to be that high. You don't need to take up the whole area. There's enough of somebody that sends out a signal that says, oh, hell no, mold, that, just a few drops of it, it's enough to keep things at bay.
So wait, you're growing Pinot Noir in Oregon, and you're saying you're not using any bottled fungicide of any kind?
Oh, that's not true. We're using sulfur.
Sulfur. Okay.
Yeah, we're using sulfur, and sulfur, although it can be really stinky and hang out on you, like it has relatively low environmental impact after 7 days or 10 days.
So and I'm just curious for my own use. You would see an oil like stylet oil, or I don't know if you've looked into things like Cinerate or like the
great product.
Are those more intense than sulfur, less intense? Or are they just a different kind of intensity?
I think they're a different kind of intensity, different mode of action. Sulfur is very cheap.
Right. Well, there's that. Yeah.
And
sure.
And that should really be like, because of the cost of some of these products, it might be your farm's only option, especially if you're only selling fruit and you're not making wine from it. Your money that you make is basically the money you don't spend. And that's very difficult to do, especially with grapes.
Yep. Okay, great. I just wanted to clear that up. Okay. So this explains why on your Instagram, I've seen video of you sort of dodging wolves to gather forest duff. Is that true?
Yeah. There's no wolves. I'm just a clown.
I know. It was very dramatic. So that's what you're actually gathering, that you're using that to help inoculate these teas, which then go into the vineyard.
Well, yeah, the forest leaf mold that we harvested, we were gonna make into a tea, but it was too wet in the vineyard to get out there, and so rather than get it out there for the sake of getting it out there, we have a very, very large compost pile from a little bit of horse bedding from our neighbor below, and all of our grape pomace. And it was cooking rather slowly. And so we decided to drench it with this last tea.
Okay. Any noticeable change since you drenched?
Oh yeah, it took right off. I mean, that could also have been driven by the sugar in it, but it definitely is producing more and more a heat, which is something that people think you need to cook compost all the way, but I honestly don't believe that's true. Compost that is still very much biologically active is what you want to put on your soil, unless it's a food crop.
Got it. Right.
Because I mean, at that point, you might be fine, and plants are covered in all sorts of these bacteria anyway. But if you, like I said, if the population of one thing is really huge on that one leaf, that's how you can spread disease, like specifically E. coli.
Right.
But for perennials, heck yeah, who cares? You can throw straight straight out on the vineyard right after pressing.
Yeah.
You don't have to compost it. We compost it at JK Carriere, just because we're not. If it was my own personal vineyard, I would be doing some things differently. But it's not my vineyard, so I'm definitely
well. I would think
definitely not going to make Jim assume any risk that he didn't sign up for.
Well, I mean, the other advantage to composting grape hummus is, like I've used fresh pumice to mulch some trees in my backyard, and now I have a wild from seed grapevine forest growing there. So I think the one advantage is you essentially could kill off the germination rate of some of those seeds, so you don't have wild grapes growing in your vineyard.
Absolutely. I would, if you're going to throw anything out there, it should be mark, because that is essentially composted as well.
Yeah.
But
explain mark for anybody who doesn't know what mark
is. So that's just what's left over after ferment. So after you press off the grapes,
right.
you're left over with this great pomace that is fully digested microbially. And alcohol soaked seeds tend not to do very well in the wild.
Well, so that's those are what I cast out, and I'm telling you, they germinated really well.
Well, never mind then.
I went straight from the press and just dumped them, and yeah, we've got it's a jungle. So the timing, I just wanted to go
think
back.
I will recant my statement then. Maybe you don't throw them all the way out there.
But in terms of the timing, you're saying you want some moisture in the soil, but obviously you don't want it too moist where you're creating compaction by going and spreading it. I think that's what you were saying about that.
Right.
Your vineyard being too moist right now.
But fall for compost or for compost teas or any sort of soil inoculation is a really good time, mostly because it just gives you more time for these populations to develop before the next growing cycle begins.
Right.
So
that's what I was wondering.
That's really the reason behind it. So you're throwing these things out there in the fall, and then if you're in Oregon, they're getting rained on,
all through the winter,
every day.
Well, you're lucky. That's all I can say. I mean, I was thinking about that here, where in the fall, I mean, that's when I'm doing it, but essentially in doing that, I mean, it hasn't rained for sometimes 10 months here, and then it's it might be a month before it actually does rain after spreading them out there, but it still seems like, I don't know, like there's no good time down here, so don't use Southern California as any standard.
Sunny, so I love it down there. My in-laws live down in Laguna Beach, which is, every time I go down there, I'm like, I should move here, but what would I do?
Exactly. Right. I know. I miss that, being able to be in the vineyards more directly. Well, okay. Any way you want to? What else? I mean, I know I've kept you talking about this thing for a while, and we've gotten to this sort of practical application stage of this mind-blowing knowledge. Is there anything you want to add? Have I cut you?
Sure. One thing that I did want to say is as farmers, you should be taking back your independence, because it's definitely been stolen from you, actively stolen from you. The fact that you spend so much of your money on resources to put out in the vineyard, is something that we've basically bought into. We've been told that we're not the experts, right? That experts from the outside are the people you should trust and listen to. But the fact is, it's even just in the knowledge of quorum sensing, there's so much we don't know. We know about 1% of microbes. That's about it. Wow. So there's really just so much we don't know. And so it's okay to trust yourself and say, there's got to be a way that we can do this ourselves, that we can do this on farm, which is a goal that I think we have at JK, is to try to figure out how we can stop off-farm inputs entirely. We've been doing lots of soil analysis, and, according to our pH, we need 2 tons of lime per acre, right, to bring our pH in balance. Well, if you look at, the way that our soil is, we actually have all the calcium in the world that we need. It's just totally locked up. So bringing in a bunch of stuff, which, the experts say we need, is going to throw the calcium ratio completely off, and then shut down availability of other things that are calcium dependent, or that are dependent on, not too much calcium. Right. So I just want to remind people that before we had experts and before we had jugs, all we had was literally us and the land and our observational skills. And what we see and what we experience on our vineyard is going to be different from place to place, but it is your experience, and it is what you see, and you should definitely trust yourself. I would say that we've labeled too many things as unscientific because they're traditional, and there is so much supremacy in that word, unscientific. And we really need to understand that, like, what we're discounting is millions of people's experience over thousands of years. And just because it doesn't fit our bias doesn't mean that it's not true. And that goes, I mean, corn is one of the biggest crops in America, even the world. And it doesn't come from Europe. It comes from here. It comes from the indigenous people here who had spent thousands of years growing it and knew how to grow it and knew different plant relationships and how those plants and animals coexisted and benefited each other, because they didn't approach farming, through this idea of domination and suppression. They didn't feel like they were given dominion over the earth, right? So they approached many cultures. I'm not trying to broadly say all, indigenous people have the same cultural practices, but everybody approached it, from an idea of reverence, as, that the earth is of them and they need to respect and be compassionate. There's many people that believe this around the world. Unfortunately, Westernism doesn't. We really believe that the earth was put there for us to do whatever we want with. And so if shifting gears and trying to approach your piece of property with compassion and understand that not all things are bad, not all bad things are bad, and not all good things are good, but it's things in balance. It's a better way to view this entire system, and to be compassionate about plant health. You have to really look at the plant itself and its environmental conditions. Are you literally driving over its feet every day with a tractor? Like, that would suck for me. I've done it. And, how will the impending weather, like, maybe I'm going to go out there and hedge my vineyard, right before we get 115-degree day. That might really suck to, like, lose a limb and then get baked. Like, we just have to think about the farm in a compassionate way. And, especially the land stewards and the people working the land, like, there might be something that you need from them for your project to be successful, but, like, you need to be compassionate for everybody that surrounds you and listen to their experience, because you might have a plan, but their experience might be a better plan. And, that's really where you should just learn to be wrong. Being wrong, I think, is probably the most important thing that anybody can learn to be, but especially a farmer. It's difficult to find out that everything that you thought you knew was wrong. I do it all the time. I'm so wrong about look, I thought that there'd be no benefit or there'd be no consequence of throwing Mark out in the vineyard, and you're telling me, based on your experience, that is not the truth. Like, it's important. You'll never learn, and you'll never, you can't test everything out yourself, but you can listen to other people and their experiences and, save yourself quite a bit of trouble by just being wrong in the moment and listening to people and be wrong. And that is being compassionate toward yourself, in a way. And it'll result, in a much better chance of success moving forward than if you think you have it figured out from the beginning. Because, to be quite honest, we really don't know anything. We think we know a lot until you start peeling back the layers, and then you realize you're really only like a few pages in to a very, very long book.
That's well, good analogy, good metaphor. It sounds like it's also, for me, I've repeated this multiple times on this podcast about just even this exercise of doing this podcast. I'll look back and be like, man, I just wish I'd shut up, because I've, what I thought then, I don't think now. And it's only, it was a day ago. You know what I mean? um, but it's I think the ability to be able to laugh at yourself rather than let that humiliation and that humbling process bring you down. Like I guess the alternative would be to weep at how wrong you were, but if you laugh, it gives you the energy to keep trying and to be able to be wrong and get back out and try again and try to do better, try to learn from that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, man, thanks so much. You have a cool Instagram. Do you want to say what that is?
It's
Do you
Drew
care if
Barely...
people know?
No, that's fine. It's Drew Barrymore.
Drew Barrymore. Okay. You're a character. I think it's a very entertaining Instagram. That's why I brought it up. And people might actually learn some stuff by following along.
Yeah, my wife keeps pushing me to not just be a clown, to be a very informative clown.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. It's really I really appreciate you sharing all of this, and I mean it's amazing stuff. I mean, it sounds like, as much as you're saying respect these things that are considered quote unquote unscientific, you are very much a scientist and take that seriously. Obviously not too seriously, but
I'm science. I have a science degree, but what I really took out of some of the things that I was learning in school, I got to study history of ecology and history of science. And what you learn when you study those things is that science changes their mind, like always.
Right.
And it might be, and it's almost always a fight, but it still changes its mind.
Right. Science is a process, not an answer.
Exactly.
It's a questioning process.
In the light of new evidence,
right.
Science can completely change everything. So that should also give you free rein to change your mind. That's if massive institutions can change their mind, you can too.
Oh, that's a good place to end. Thank you so much, Drew. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It was